Hello, all. Welcome. Those of you guys who are coming back, thanks for joining in. Those of you guys who are new, I'm Counselor Jay, and I try to upload something helpful for high school students every Monday. So today I want to dive right into the three signals that I've started to really etch out as an assessment that I use myself when I meet with students as part of my profession. I call them the three signals. So without further ado, your application needs these three signals: AQ, EQ, and IQ. Let's dive right in. All right. So the admission overview indicated right there on the screen. You're really not getting any surprises with this, hopefully. Grades and test scores, 1 and 2. Then you have everything else, which is essays, extracurriculars, recommendation letters, interviews. There may be some other things like portfolios or whatnot, but I wanted to keep things simple. Every school has an academic profile. Every school has an academic expectation as a result. So your grades and test scores are probably your most important indicators of what your chances are. But once you meet that threshold, if you notice that your academic record is within range of a certain school, maybe at the average or above the average, then you have to start shifting your focus into everything else, which gets you accepted, which is the holistic assessment part, which is 3, 4, 5, and 6: essays, extracurriculars, recommendation letters, and interviews. At the bottom of the screen, I also indicated two additional points: the major choice and tags. Major choices I've already discussed in a super early, one of my first videos. I mentioned how major choices are more and more important as you apply for higher ranking schools. Tags I recently introduced, maybe about last week or the week before, but every year a college, an admissions committee will have certain tags that they're looking for, or that they'll give more value to. For example, whether you're a first generation college student, or whether it could be good things like whether you're a national debate champion, so you have national recognition at a competitive event, or other things like you had divorced parents or a single mom household. Those kinds of things will be tags that they incorporate. Legacy is another one that's incorporated. What signals are they looking for from all of this? So going back, these are the 6 things, but we need to kind of do more of an eagle-eye view of these 6 things and ask ourselves, what are they actually looking for? I know they're looking for grades and test scores, but what are they trying to assess when they see a GPA and when they see a test score? What are they trying to assess when they see an essay written by a student, a personal statement at 650 words? So that's where I come to the 3 signals. They're looking for AQ, EQ, or AQ, IQ, and EQ. So AQ is your academic intelligence. This is your studentship. This is your ability to do deadlines, to study for exams, to take on subject materials that you may not enjoy but still get graded on, so you study for. This comes down to a sense of professionalism, I think. Like, do you come to class on time? Do you organize your deadlines well? So do you manage your workload well? Things of that nature. It's going to be demonstrated through grades and test scores, but also through some competitive activities or achievements. Let's say for like a debate competition or USA Math Olympics. These are all going to indicate some form of academic propensity, academic proficiency. If I'm a college, I obviously want a student that shows that they are going to be good students. So that's what AQ is. Then it's the other 2, IQ and EQ. Let's start with IQ as the second there. IQ I define as your intellectual vitality. This is your intellectual depth, how much you've gone deeper than other students and specialized, your awareness of the major choice in terms of contemporariness, or let's say you being aware of the news. Like, I've seen a lot of, for example, econ students. They want to major in econ, but they have no idea what's going on with the Fed and interest rates. So it's kind of a tell that, okay, your IQ is not really ready for tier 1, tier 2. It seems like you're more of a tier 3 student. That kind of thing shows up a lot. So IQ is showing that you have a higher level understanding of the meta of your major interest. And then EQ, it's your emotional, community, and social intelligence. I'm sure you guys have seen or could bear witness to a student that's just on paper, just a straight up pumper, like just 4.0 unweighted, 4.6, 1600 SAT score. But then when you actually have a conversation with them, their personality is very meager or very weak. And sometimes like it's kind of like they over-invested in making sure their academic is so strong that they didn't have the social development they need to be a little bit more well-rounded. So EQ to me is about that kind of situation. You need to have the emotional, community, and social intelligence as well. The reason why they'll be looking for this is because the future is really much more collaborative than it was before. Your ability to be impactful in a university research environment inherently is going to require some form of community experience, your ability to click with the community, your ability to be dumped into a new team and then having to quickly pick up your efficiency and productivity and see how people work certain ways so that you guys can mesh well together. EQ, very underrated. IQ, most students have like the research, but then when it comes to the essays, it's a problem. And then AQ, everyone already knows about. Sometimes the problem it's an overemphasis of just the AQ, not really realizing how important the IQ and the EQ are. The IQ and EQ, as mentioned here, they're going to show up in the essays. I think like what separates students, let's say we have a sea of students that are 1,500 plus SAT, their academics are just tier 1, like let's say 1,600, perfect A's. Where do they fall short? Usually in the essays when it comes to IQ and EQ. That's where they fall short. So I want to try to show you kind of how that pans out. What I've realized is you can start to give students assessments. You can give them an AQ score, an IQ score, and an EQ score. And I realized that the average of those scores, by and large, correlate with what your chances are going to be for each tier of college. If you're curious about what I mean by tier 1 and tier 2, I'll just paraphrase, generalize, sorry. Tier 1 would be maybe rank 1 to 15, so, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton to Cornell. Tier 2s would be kind of 15 to 30, so UCLA, USC, that kind of range. And then tier 3s would be maybe UCI, 30 to 50 range, UC San Diego, Northeastern, Case Western Reserve, etc. If you're interested in the tiers, you just need to look up one of my earlier videos, Research University Tier List, and there's a spreadsheet for that in the video description. But anyways, yeah, I've seen by assessing what the average of your AQ, IQ, and EQ scores are, that becomes more of an accurate measure, predictor of where you'll get accepted and what your chances are. I've seen a lot of students that their AQs, and parents especially, fall prone to this. They think that their son or their daughter is amazing with the AQ because they have really good test scores and grades. But then when it comes to essays, and I would raise a very strong suspicion when it comes to teacher recommendations, they're really lacking in the IQ and the EQ department. The reason why that's tougher, the reason why this happens, I think, is because AQ, socioculturally, we figured out a solution to that where parents can try to reinforce that, and that would be through after-school programs and things of that nature. And occasionally you'll get lucky and you'll hit a counselor at an after-school program that not only teaches you how to do your homework, but then also stimulates your IQ and your EQ. But that's rarely the case. So the question then I see a lot of parents having about this is, if I can get AQ somewhat supported through after-school academy, tutoring, whatnot, how do I get support for IQ and EQ? And frankly, I don't really have an answer for that just yet. It's harder to pull off. And that's why I see a lot of parents getting blindsided and realizing, at least from my point of view, that their understanding of what gets their child in was missing two critical factors. And those two critical factors were unnurtured or were unsupported throughout the 4 years of high school. Let's talk about EQ first, how we can make it stronger. I think if I show you how it's written in the essays, parents and students, you guys can get a sense of how your EQ can be improved. So in the essays, I'm going to present some examples. One of the things you want to do with your EQ to show a strong EQ signal in the essays is to offer deeper introspections and personal reflections. So let's say the bad EQ, music allows me to express myself. Very generic, very baseline, very shallow. A better EQ would be, my journey as a musician taught me how powerful the connections we can make by turning vibrations in the air into deeper channels into our memories and our emotions. I'm sorry that wasn't the best thing, but I was on the spot writing these up, and I hope that this does still demonstrate the difference you can make with your essays, how you can try to go one step beyond the norm, the expectation, and try to write in a much more insightful or personal way. I'm looking for that in essays. When I see the bad EQs, I'm immediately thinking that the student's EQ level is still too shallow. You could be more nuanced in your essays and genuine in your expression. So a bad example is, as the club leader, I proudly watched as the team made it to the finals. That's kind of a resume flex. I phrase it that way. Resume flexing is generally done too much. Here's a better EQ right underneath. When our club reached the finals, I reflected on all the concerted efforts of each member it took to get us there, and the importance of a unified vision in conjunction with structure, preparation, and motivation, all of which I want to continue to become more capable of. So hopefully that's a better example, but that gives a much deeper, more nuanced, and I would argue more professional and mature reflection on their experience. And third point, a heightened maturity shown through life hardships or challenges. A bad EQ example, life was tough for me as I struggled with the language barrier and had to get help my parents translate the bills. You can even add on to that, and so I struggled with my schoolwork because I had so much work to do with helping home, yada yada. Sounds kind of excusey. Versus a better EQ, I recognized the bridge I could be for my parents during those first several years, becoming their eyes and ears as well as voice. Looking back, I feel more capable and open to tackling the greater complexities each year my schooling and life bring because of it. Hopefully that gives a heightened sense of that comparison between a bad EQ and a better EQ. Your EQs will also be shown through your teacher recommendations. I honestly think most parents are going to get blindsided by how the teacher recommendations are going to show up. They have this sparkly eye view of their child, and the truth of the matter is probably 1 out of 10 of the parents I meet legitimately have reason to believe that. I think the rest of the 9 are kind of rosy-eyed, rosy lens about their son or daughter, which is fine. You know, you want to be their best advocate. But when it comes to teacher recommendations, I think like a lot of parents and students don't realize, oh, my teacher offered to write me a letter rec. That must be a good thing. Not necessarily. I think a teacher can mention that you are a good student and that you have things to improve upon in a letter of rec. In fact, that's what I see a lot. And some students think that they're going to get something even better than that. They think they're going to get, oh, he's an amazing person with an amazing personality, blah, 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 blah student. But the truth of the matter is the teacher recommendation is actually a little bit more lukewarm than that. So teacher recommendations, your ability to show EQ is something you start from day one when you start your first day of class with that teacher. Are you in front of that teacher responsive? If there's teamwork situations or group project situations, are you the one who stands out as an example of someone who can bring people together? Or are you toxic and are you problematic and are you very picky about the way you want to work and therefore demonstrate a low EQ signal, right? Teacher recommendations, I think, are going to be a big giveaway. And I think essays, above all else, is the area you can control as a student. To make sure that your signal is stronger. How do you make your IQ signal stronger? Through your essays. So I'm going to give you a couple examples again. So for your essays, you want to get to the next level of your intellectual interests. A bad IQ, very shallow IQ is, I'm interested in computer science. A better IQ than that is, I'm eager to explore the next generation of cybersecurity, where we'll need to improve upon the SHA-256 encryption thresholds and explore how they'll evolve hand in hand with the critical infrastructures that modern society rely on most. And maybe you can tie that into like your interest in the stock market and cybersecurity regarding like the financial institutions. Hopefully that gives you a clear example of how computer science is the starting point. You want to go deeper than computer science, show how you didn't just stop there at the book cover, but you actually cracked the book open and you went deep into the chapters. Second example, it's about showing contemporary interest by watching relevant news and industry trends. I've seen a lot of students say they like computer science or business, but as I mentioned earlier, they have no idea what's going on with the Fed or the interest rates. So they're posers. I'll just call you out. I think a lot of students and parents who set up these students are just straight up posers. They get good grades, their AQ is strong, but their EQ and IQ it's very empty. I've seen that so many times. I continue to see that as the issue, specifically in like competitive Southern California environments. You got to start watching the news. Think of it this way. I'm a huge basketball fan. So imagine if you came onto a basketball court and you're saying, yeah, I'm so into basketball. I'm so ready to go and take it to the next level. And then we ask you a simple question. Okay, who do you play your style after? Are you a fan of Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant? And then you sit there saying, who? Who's Michael Jordan? If you have no idea so let's translate that. Let's say you're really interested in computer science. Okay, then who is the Michael Jordan of computer science to you today? I think a lot of students will struggle at that. I think a lot of students will have this very shallow, very limited understanding or insight into their major interest. So therefore their IQ signal is very weak. I want you to think about how a top tier university doesn't want to pick up a baby. They don't want to pick up a level 1 noob scrub. They want to pick up students that have already grinded out that university level experience and are showing a wokeness, an awareness, a wherewithal about their major interest. I think a lot of students really, and parents, I think we just underestimate just how important an IQ can be. I would go as far as to argue, if you write an essay that has a stronger IQ, you could probably beat 60-70% of your competition just with a stronger IQ. The IQ will also be shown through activities in summer programs. It's not to say that an IQ can only be one thing and then an EQ can only be another. For example, a really strong summer program can be a good signal for your IQ and AQ. AQ being your academic competitiveness, maybe it was a competitive program, and IQ because maybe the summer program goes deep into pluripotent cell research and you want to be a biochemist. So there's an overlap. I think some of the strongest IQ signals you send are in the essays and how you showcase a deeper interest and express a mature university level awareness of your major field. It's also shown IQ-wise, another strong way, a required strong way, I'd say, if you're aiming for top 15 schools, would be through summer program experiences, university level summer experiences, whether that's a research program or an internship. Your teacher recommendations will also be able to showcase a bit of IQ signaling. Obviously, if they write something in that respect about your ability to generate intellectual insight during class discussions, things of that nature, then your teacher recommendation can showcase that IQ signal for you as well. Tags, I just wanted to briefly mention, I was mentioning the admissions overview, and I was getting some questions about tags, so I just want to be clear about this. Every school has its own set of tags. There's some very common ones, like being a first-generation college student, a single-parent family, coming from a low economic background, whether you're a legacy, if your parents or family members are employees of a university, these are all tags. Tags are good. Tags are things that will give you an edge over students who don't have or have lesser tags. Some students will just have, therefore, an inherent advantage over you. All right? And that's not to say that I don't know where I want to go with that. I'm just going to come out with it again. Some school students will have an advantage over you. And when it comes to what essay topics you can personally and genuinely write about, a student that grew up in a single family household is going to have more interesting challenges to a certain degree, are going to have more dramatic, I guess, rather than interesting, let's say more dramatic and more impactful at the face value at the very least. So if you're a student that unfortunately does not have any social woes, your parents are doing fine and everyone's healthy, boo-hoo you, right, when it comes to the admissions process. But that shouldn't be an excuse. I think that you can still demonstrate really strong EQ and IQ without having any kind of sob story tag. But that doesn't mean you should give up on your writing, as I stated here. Instead, you should be more driven to reach deeper into showcasing your EQ and IQ in your personal and unique ways. And that's, again, going to show through mostly what I think, your essays. Closing thoughts about AQ, EQ, and IQ. There's less room for error with AQ, and AQs will generally set your range of college expectations. What I mean by that is the higher the rank you go, the less room for error you have when it comes to your grades and test scores. It almost becomes a default that if you're trying to apply for Stanford, you have to have all A's. One of the best ways to stand out and improve your chances in that range, and perhaps even try fishing for a higher tier, is if you once set your AQ, start developing your EQ and IQ. Start developing and figuring out how you're going to showcase the strong emotional intelligence and the strong intellectual depth and specialization through your activities mainly, but also through your essays. Lastly, if your AQ is set, let's say you got good grades and test scores, I'm beseeching you today, please start thinking about your EQ and IQ. Otherwise, your AQ is going to go to waste. Do not rely on just a strong AQ to carry you into a tier 1 or tier 2 school. A strong AQ can probably carry you into a tier 3 school. But when it comes to tier 2s and tier 1s, like, it's so competitive now, you got to have a strong EQ and IQ signal. And then lastly, if your AQ is not set, then focus on your AQ. I don't think there's anything more important than your academic profile. But once your academic profile is set, you need to make sure that you're doing the due diligence of developing your EQ and IQ, because you don't want to be left empty-handed compared to the other students that do. And that's it. I hope that this was helpful. Look out for another video on Monday. Thanks for supporting this, and I'll see you guys around.